Case 623 by Danny Yu. Chapter 9.
And who would you nominate? Stucker? Whitehall? One of the Red Hydra butchers?
Of course not, Airpierce. Even those among us who believe most deeply in Johann Schmidt's teachings do not embody them. Besides, giving the leader of any one faction more power will only deepen the divides in our ranks. You want the perfect human being you believe to discard to be, created from science, not bred. We don't have the means to create a superior race, Ola, not unless you fish the formula out from those rusted drives of yours.
I cannot believe you, Brody said as Tony hoisted a sleepy Jamie higher on his hip and gave the electronic lock a thumbprint and retina scan. Honestly, first serious time I get off in forever and you drive me off to Spain. Doesn't sound so bad to me, Tony said, walking inside and fishing his phone out of his pocket, set it to upload Jarvis onto the house servers. With fewer cameras and less bandwidth, it wouldn't be as effective as in some of his more well-used properties, but still. I mean, did you just listen to yourself? That literally sounds like I did an awesome thing for you, and you're just being a bitch about it. Tony, it isn't even one of the good parts of Spain, Brody said. There are no beaches in Madrid. Now, if it had been Barcelona or Malaga, there are no engineering conferences in Barcelona and Malaga, Tony said, putting his phone on the table so it could finish uploading and stepping to the side so Happy and the housekeeper could start hauling the luggage inside. And don't pretend you're not excited about the conference, he added. You can pretend all day long, but we both know you're a card-carrying nerd. I was in MIT with you, Jamie interrupted before they could keep the argument going, pointing up at a picture on the wall, the thumb going momentarily to his mouth before he dropped it. Who that? He asked. Tony followed his gaze, grinned. That's Daddy, he said. A long, long time ago. And Grandma Maria, Daddy's mom. She owned this house, kiddo. We'd go here on vacation sometimes. Jamie blinked at the picture, eyes going distant for a moment, the way they were doing with increasing frequency these days. Tony bit down a stab of worry. Pretty, Jamie finally decided, fully present again. Tony nodded, ruffling up the toddler's flyaway hair. Very, he agreed before putting the 16-month-old down on the floor so he could explore. And hey, he told Brody, if you don't want to go to the conference and listen to my awesome lecture, you could just stay here and have a three-way battle with Happy and my aunt for babysitting privileges. Tony, we can't release a new tablet model yet, Pepper said with a sigh. The current model is still top of the line, and we've got too many already fabricated to release a new one. Never mind that we can't afford to saturate the market. She paused a moment. In 6 months, this will be a huge deal. Right now, it's just not necessary. Tony groaned, ran a hand through his hair. What do you want me to do? He asked. You keep telling me we can't use arc reactor technology. I keep telling you it's safe and... Tony, we cannot afford the scandal if the wrong person gets their hands on it and manages to weaponize it. She slid into the chair across from him in the workshop, turning off her tablet and putting it away. If you really want to keep going down the green energy route, you need to think about other ways of doing it. I know you could design a windmill better than anything that's currently on the market if you send your mind to it. I could, Tony said, glancing off to the side where Jamie was sitting in his playpen, practicing his words with the help of Jarvis and a set of holographic images. But why would I do that when they'll be antiques the moment arc reactor technology hits the market? Pepper, it's going to happen sooner or later. The question is whether we do it, whether we get the patents and make the money, or if we let someone else beat us to the punch. He took a breath. Listen, I've done everything here. I've laid out plans for the installation that makes sure none of our technicians would even know more than a fraction of what they're working with. I've designed an AI-controlled security system and a very sensitive self-destruct function. No one will get their hands on it if it melts before they even touch it. I'm not an idiot. I've actually thought this through. Pepper opened her mouth, snapped it shut, looked at him for a long moment, then she gave another sigh. You're determined about this, aren't you? He nodded. You're going to have to come up with the actual PR to sell this, she told him. And Tony, please go over those plans sent up from R&D. Some of the poor engineers down there are swallowing bullets thinking you're going to hate their ideas. Tony gave another nod. Is that all? Pepper cracked a grin. That's all, she said, getting up and making for the door. And I think your son is talking to the wall. Tony frowned and pulled himself out of the chair, walked across the floor to crouch down by the playpen. Jamie didn't seem to even notice his approach, eyes distant as he babbled away in full-on baby mode, despite the fact that Tony knew for a fact that he spoke extremely well for 20 months old. "Hey, buddy," he said, keeping his voice soft. Jamie blinked for a moment before turning wide gray eyes on Tony. "Maria wants to Jarvis," he said. Tony blinked. "Who's Maria?" he asked then. Jamie beamed up at him, and Tony couldn't keep himself from reaching down and scooping up the toddler. "Maria's my friend," Jamie said. Then he flashed a grin. "Kiss?" he asked. Tony let out a laugh and leaned in to blow a raspberry against his son's cheek, ruffling his hair. "One more," Jamie said. "Maria wants one too." Tony blinked, but let the oddity of that pass. Lots of kids had imaginary friends. He smacked him another kiss and then busied himself tickling the kid until he was squealing with laughter. Tony looked up in the middle of scrawling and eyed on a napkin while explaining what he was doing to a very attentive toddler and slightly less attentive best friend when someone slid into their booth, the newest stuck-tab model and a stylist, making an immediate appearance from her bag. Tony frowned, folded that napkin, and stuffed it in his pocket. "What's up, bro?" he asked, already feeling pretty damn exhausted, even as he plastered on his good old Stark smile. Jamie looked up at the newcomer curiously, abandoning his crayons to look at her with wide eyes. "Hi!" he greeted. Rhodey looked on with narrowed eyes. "Hello, Tony," Everhart returned before flashing a smile at Jamie. "And you must be James." Her attention returned to Tony. "He's a cutie." "I know," Tony replied, already uneasy. "Last I checked, you didn't do celebrity gossip." "You checked?" she asked with a cocked eyebrow. "I actually wanted to ask for a comment about the recent rumors that Islamic State in Iraq are using decommissioned Stark weapons against the coalition forces," she said. "Though I won't deny it's a pleasure to meet your son. You've proven uncharacteristically adept at keeping him out of the spotlight." "Listen," Tony said. "Once upon a time I made weapons. I made a hell of a lot of weapons. More than I realized, and a man I trusted sold them under the table and did not keep a lot of records. Finding and destroying them takes time because, sadly, half the time I don't know where they are until some of them are used." "And yet you boasted about privatizing world peace while a civil war was raging in Iraq," Everhart said. "Sounds a bit like you're trying to have your cake and eat it too." Tony did not grit his teeth, did not insult her, did not do any of the dozen things he wanted to right then. He stubbornly kept the smile on his face. "I was in Basra last week," he said. "Took out the cachet there. Did you really come here to discuss old news?" "No," she said. "I came here to—" "Shit, Everhart!" Rhodey interrupted. "We're trying to have an ice cream here. Tony's out with his son and his friend, who hasn't gotten to spend time with him in months because he's also dealing with Iraq. The fact that you slept with him once doesn't give you the right to wreck that." Everhart's cheeks flushed as she opened her mouth to say something else, but Happy was finally there, firmly escorting her away. "Fuck, Tony," Rhodey said. "Please tell me that's not the last person you've slept with." Tony's grimace and non-answer was probably answer enough to that. "So," Tony said, putting the storybook away and turning Jamie in his arms until they were facing each other. "Snack time." With one arm firmly around his son's back so he wouldn't drop him, he leaned forward and snatched the bowl off the table. "How many jelly beans are in the bowl?" Jamie frowned in concentration, eyes narrowing at the contents of the bowl. He pointed one grubby little finger at them one by one. "1," he said. "2, 3 jelly beans." Tony nodded, stroking a flyaway curl out of the boy's face. 3 jelly beans, he agreed. "And if I say you can have 5 jelly beans with your snack, how many do I need to go fetch?" Jamie's face scrunched up as he slowly began to count on his fingers. 2, he said then. "No, 3. No, Maria, that's wrong. It's 2. He looked up at Tony with a triumphant look on his face, all big eyes and chubby cheeks, and even as concern kept chipping away at something inside Tony, right now all he could focus on was how much he loved seeing his son smile. "Do, Daddy," he said. "That's right," Tony agreed, shifting the 2-year-old around until he could get to his feet, Jamie on his hip, with his arms wrapped around his neck, and made his way towards the kitchens. "Good job, buddy. And tell Maria that was very close. Well done of her, too." "I don't have to tell her," Jamie said. She can hear you. Tony cocked an eyebrow. Does Maria want a snack too? Jamie shook his head, giggling. That's silly, he said. Maria isn't here. Tony frowned because, that didn't really fit at all with any of the psychology articles he'd read on the imaginary friends phenomenon, unless it was a sign that Jamie was finally beginning to separate reality and fantasy. Where is she then? Jamie released one of his hands from where it had been gripping Tony's shirt and pointed at his head. In here, he said. He blinked. And she don't know where. But she can hear us, Tony asked. Jamie nodded. And she can talk to you, Tony pressed. Jamie nodded again, and Tony made a mental note to talk to someone who knew psychology. He wasn't going to make Jamie talk to a shrink, not on his life. Tony'd had enough of that in his own childhood, wasn't about to subject his son to the same. But asking for some advice, coupled with some airtight non-disclosure agreements, that might not be a bad plan. Tony was putting a sandwich together when the door opened and Pepper walked in, heels clapping against the floor. Jamie nearly fell off the counter in his excitement, and Tony quickly helped him down so he could race over and greet her. Auntie Pepper! Auntie Pepper! He was calling, wrapping himself around her legs until she gave in, stuck her phone in her purse, and picked him up. Daddy says I can have jelly beans with my snack! Pepper gave him one of the soft smiles that seemed mostly reserved for Jamie these days. Did he now? Lucky you, she said before putting him back down, turning her attention to Tony. You said you had a PR plan, she said. Tony grinned, finished up the sandwich, cut it in quarters, and put it on a plate before bending down and putting it on the child-sized table at the end of the kitchen island. Jamie raced over immediately, sat down, and dug in. We need to show the world what kind of energy an arc reactor can provide, Tony told Pepper, smoothing Jamie's hair out of his face in passing as he went around him, picking up a start tab from the counter and calling up the plans before handing it over to Pepper. We can use some new office space. Boardroom. The facilities we have for R&D right now are outdated, and the more different types of technology we expand into, the more space we're going to need. I figure we should just do the whole thing in one stroke. Pepper stared down at the plans for long moments before looking back at him, eyes wide. You want to build a skyscraper? Tony grimaced. Yeah, no. He frowned. Well, I want a skyscraper, but I prefer to leave the actual building to someone else. I can design a building if I want to. He gestured around him, trying to indicate the whole of the house they stood in, but it's damn boring. Nearly as boring as netting investors. Pepper sighed. You want me to build you a skyscraper? Tony shrugged. Or, find the people who can do it. Pepper stared at him for long moments, glanced down at the tentative plans on the start tab screen. Slowly, a smile began to tuck on her lips. This could actually work, she said slowly, and he could hear the mounting excitement in her voice, however professional she was trying to sound. This could really work, Tony. Tony flashed her a grin. One thing, he said. I want an in-house daycare. Should be free for all employees, ideally, but mostly I just want an in-house daycare. Moving back to New York? She asked. Tony felt a strange swoop of excitement. Maybe I'm homesick, he said. Maybe I don't want my kid to be a California boy. It would be nice if he didn't end up associating Christmas with high sun and surfing and crap. And maybe it would be good for him, get to hang out with other kids with geeks for parents. Her smile softened to something gentle, and for a moment Tony was reminded of just what he'd almost felt for her once. I heard the MetLife building is struggling. Might be able to get it for a decent price. Tony grinned. Well then, Chop. I've missed New York summers. Would like to be there by next year. Pepper rolled her eyes. Not a tall order at huh. But they both know she worked damn fast when she wanted to.